When we started this CB750 project, it was pretty obvious the suspension had seen better days. The forks were leaking and the rear shocks were rusty and weak. For the forks, a rebuild's pretty simple, with some new fluid and some parts. And for the rear, we went with RFY Olin's clones. They look a lot better, and they should perform well too. We start by placing the shock on the top mount so the reservoir is facing the rear. Using the original factory bolt, the lower part of the shock is secured to the swing arm. We then use the correct socket to tighten the lower bolt. This process is repeated exactly for the second shock. To complete the rear shock install, the top mounting bolts need to be installed and tightened. And we repeat for the other side. Since the shocks are now complete, we can move on to the forks. Once we have the front wheel off, we can loosen the triple bolts and remove the forks. At the workbench, we can secure one of the forks in a vise and then remove the top cap. Then the bolt in the lower fork leg can be removed while the fluid drains into the pan. Using a pick, the seal retaining clip is removed. We then use a slide hammer motion to separate the upper and lower tubes. The upper tubes of these forks had surface rust in the mounting areas. Aluminum foil and water can be used to remove this rust. Off camera, the fork lowers were painted gold to give them a nice new look. We can then start reassembling using new seals and bushings. The tubes are then aligned so the lower fork bolt can be reinstalled. Sealant and a new crush washer are used. The bolt is tightened to seal everything from leaking. The fork spring is now installed. Using the vise and a seal driver, the lower bushing is hammered into place. The fork seal is then positioned and then driven into place. The retaining clip can now be installed. The next step is to install the dust seal. With the fork back in the vise, we measure out the specified amount of fluid and pour it into the fork. In performance applications, the oil height should be checked using a measuring tool. I opted to skip this step. Finally, the top cap is reinstalled with a new O-ring. Once both forks have been rebuilt, they can be installed on the motorcycle. Tighten only the top bolt here so the fork cannot fall out. Then the other fork can be installed. The lower bolts can now be tightened, which completes the fork rebuild and shock install.